Now, this is quite an interesting area because there is such a big chasm between girls' perception of the dating game and guys' perception. Girls, and it's really important to understand this, girls are more than happy to have you as a friend. They believe the myth that girls and guys can be friends. You can be their best friend, you can be their best gay friend. They actually believe that, that's an absolutely fine kind of a scenario. The simple fact is, and this is a generalisation, but I think probably in 95% of cases it applies. The simple fact is that a guy, if he's hanging out with a girl for any extended period of time, or even for a very small period of time, wants to have sex with her.
We are just going to be friends, okay?
Great, friends. It's the best thing. You realize, of course, that we can never be friends.
Why not?
What I'm saying is, and this is not a come on in any way, shape, or form, is that men and women can't be friends because the sex part always gets in the way.
That's not true. I have a number of men friends and there is no sex involved.
No, you don't.
Yes, I do.
No, you don't.
Yes, I do.
You only think you do.
You're saying I'm having sex with these men without my knowledge?
No, what I'm saying is they all want to have sex with you.
They do not.
Do too.
They do not.
Do too.
How do you know?
Because no man can be friends with a woman that he finds attractive. He always wants to have sex with her.
So you're saying that a man can be friends with a woman he finds unattractive?
No, you pretty much want to nail him too.
It's just a kind of a simple fact of basic biology, I guess. A girl has a different perspective on the situation. She genuinely is not aware, does not kind of like acknowledge, even when you're on a date, that it is a situation in which it might lead to sex, in which you are romantically interested in her. It's difficult to get your head around that, isn't it? I was talking to an attractive young woman just last week who's in a long-term relationship, had a kid in fact, and she had no idea. She's spent many years as a friend of this particular guy. She had no idea that when he invited her out for a drink that his intentions were romantic. She just, I don't know, girls sort of manufacture this fantasy, wonderful fantasy world of everybody loves everybody else and we're all good friends. But she came out on the date with him, and she was astonished when he, communicated to her that he was romantically interested in her, and she was like, oh, okay, so that's the dynamic here, fine. And that's something that you really need to kind of understand. You really need to put yourself into the shoes of a girl and appreciate that she believes in the myth that men and women can be friends, and unless you've communicated to her, this is particularly true, let's say, where she's part of a social circle, or you've met her at a club or a sports club or a salsa club or whatever it might be, and you then ask her out, and she's not going to automatically assume that it is a date, okay, unless you communicate that fact. Now, I'm not going to go into the detail of, how to communicate romantic interest in a girl. Just look back at all the other vlogs on this dating issue and you will see all sorts of methods, techniques to get yourself through that glass ceiling of thinking that this is a friendly date. What guys tend to do is they tend to want to protect their ego, and so they don't want to be honest about their sexual interest in a girl. This is just so common in, the 21st century dating arena, and it's just sort of impregnated, socially conditioned into the male mind. I don't think it can always have been like this. I mean, back in the day, really, when we was cavemen, did guys really have friends who were girls that they didn't want to sleep with? No, it's extremely, it's a very modern and very artificial phenomenon. Perhaps part of the problem is that we are living in the soup of the internet. We're living in the kind of soup of the feminized groupthink around men and women being equal, not celebrating the differences. There's all of that going on. Now, this vlog is inspired by a date that I had, Ching 52 First Dates, available on Amazon, with a girl who, it was quite clear on the first date that this was headed towards the bedroom. So this was a situation in which I had communicated clearly on the date that I was romantically interested in her, but even so I didn't follow through. Now this is another problem that clients experience. They simply, for some reason, I think to do with the way that they tend to think, well, essentially it's about fear, isn't it? You know, in those situations where you kind of think, well, I'll wait till the second date or the third date. I won't ask her back to my apartment tonight. So this was a date where it was exactly that situation. She'd actually told me towards the end of the day, oh, I better just check the trains. Oh, I might miss my last train. Oh, well, never mind, I'll stay in Warsaw. I've got a friend I can phone up. Yeah, really? What she's communicating to you is that she is happy to go forward to, you know, have a bit of adventure. Now, you know, I nevertheless, even when presented with, you know, the facts in front of my own eyes that she was communicating sexual interest in me, I was nevertheless, just at the last minute, kind of, I actually walked her back to my flat and then didn't quite follow through, you know the feeling? And then I walked her to the metro so she could catch the last metro. And I was like feeling satisfied that I'd reached a certain point, yeah, in terms of the relationship with her, such that I didn't, you know, I was like, well, quit while you're ahead sort of thing, like being in a casino and you're on a winning streak and you decide to finish early. And it's funny, isn't it, because when you're on a losing streak you carry on playing until you lose more. The psychology is when you're on a winning streak, you quit while you're ahead, when actually if you're on a streak you should probably, you know, exhaust that streak and see it right through to the bitter end. So yeah, and here's another issue that comes up for guys in the area of intent. They, you know, they may be thinking that they're interested in a long-term relationship, like I am. And so they think, well, if that's what my interest is, and a lot of guys who are watching this, I think, will be, you know, interested in a long-term relationship, the older vintage do, they often think, well, let's not be too, you know, sexually aggressive on the first date. Well, it really isn't your decision, it's how the girl is reacting. You've got to take your cues from the girl. And if you decide that, no, I'm going to just, you know, kind of call it quits, that is closing the door, number one, on a window of opportunity. It could just be a fantastic, fun, fizzy kind of sexual adventure that you are closing the door on. Number two, and I think here's the critical point, it's not like it's going to hurt your chances in terms of getting into a long-term relationship with that girl if you do make the moves, push forward, be, you know, more sexual and lead hard. You tend to think that there's kind of like, there's a girl who's interested in sex and adventure, and so that's fine. And where you are just interested in some fun with a girl, it's much, much easier to escalate. But you need to apply the same sort of principles to a girl with whom you're interested in a long-term relationship with. In fact, you need to apply those principles even more aggressively than you would otherwise. Now, because it's a win-win, yeah? If you've communicated that sexual intent to her and you are following through, one of two things is going to happen. She can end up in your bedroom, or she can say, no, thank you very much, you're going too fast to me. Either way is a win-win, you think about it, isn't it? Because let's be honest, if you wake up the next morning and you've had sex with a girl and you like her, it's going to be a lot easier for you going forward in terms of building a long-term relationship out of that. And you'll probably have got some useful information about whether you're sexually compatible, and you'll have had an honest conversation after sex as well. It's often the most honest conversations that actually happen after you've been playing the game, and, you know, you've won the game, as it were, and you can then kind of roll off and just have a normal conversation with the girl and get to know her better. So it's a win-win either way. And even if she does rebuff you and indicate that you're moving too fast for her, that's not a no, is it? She's been attracted to you by your sexual aggression, for want of a better word. I can't think of a better word. It's perhaps a politically incorrect word that could get me in trouble, aggression, but say it how it is. It is sexual aggression. It's not aggression, it's sexual aggression. And then, you have another go on the second or the third date. But for some reason, we just refuse to accept that kind of reasonable, kind of evidence-based conclusion. And I just don't know why it is. I could guess you could get psychological on it and go back and look at childhood. I guess basically, rather than sort of root around in, the scrapyard of childhood regrets, you could just simply see it in a very simple way, which is it's just fear, isn't it? You'd rather not take the risk of losing her, of the wheels coming off, and so you don't do it. And yet it is such an unreasonable position to adopt, because as I've just described, it's a win-win. I mean, obviously you've got to do it with confidence and like you mean it. I mean, that's true of anything in life. If you're going to go into it half-hearted and dithery, well then, obviously that might be a problem. That might be kind of painful. But even that is probably better than going home having not attempted it. It's like if you, what's the expression? It's better to try and fail than fail to try. It's going to leave you with far more sort of unhappy, corrosive feeling in your bones if you haven't even tried than if you've tried and the wheels have come off. Failure, my friend, is a stepping stone to success. So whether it's you're dealing with kind of external factors of the girl and her attitudes, or whether you're dealing with your own internal obstacles in terms of ultimately not wanting to risk failure, whichever scenario you are dealing with, it's critical that you are telegraphing. Let's say telegraphing your intent at every stage. Now, look, obviously you've got to be intelligent, and anything I've said, you've got to be intelligent. If she's a quiet, reserved, shy girl and she's not ready, then you need to apply some emotional intelligence to the situation and take it step by step. The rule there is always to be moving it forward, even if it's very slowly. Don't be treading water. Sometimes actually going back in order to go forward can be moving it forward. Like you just go for a quick coffee over lunch after, being very close to something happening on the actual date itself. And then, but the general sort of, direction of travel is progress, small stepping stones, sort of escalation towards the bedroom ultimately. Be honest with yourself about that's what you want from the girl and be clear in communicating that intent. I'll just conclude by referencing quite a good film on this issue. It's a soppy romantic comedy. It's a ghost comedy about a guy who loses his fiancée on the afternoon of their wedding. She's a real super bitch, and she manages to get into an argument with the guys who are delivering the ice sculpture, which is like the centerpiece of the arrangements for the wedding dinner, and it falls off the back of the van and kills her. The film is called Over Her Dead Body, and there's an interesting subplot in this film, which is that Lake Bell lives with a gay guy, and comics are so brilliant at pointing out truths and issues, particularly that men face, 21st century movie making often focuses on the weaknesses that men are struggling with. And in this movie, towards the end, it turns out that he has actually been attracted to her for years, and he has been pretending to be gay in order to try and get close to her.
I have to say something. Now, you know I never get involved in your love life.
Bullshit.
Fine, as someone who's always involved in your love life, I think you should listen to me. You're making a huge mistake.
No, I'm not. Help me with the car.
Okay. It's not because his fiance's ghost is trying to drive you away, and it's not because he's a client who you lie to. But you talk about picking guys with problems. He just got out of a relationship where his bride was killed on their wedding day, and you'll be the first girl he dates. That's a pretty serious rebound. You really think this is going to end up well, huh?
Nice try. You're still handling the learner party alone. Ladies and gentlemen, Cherry's Jubilee.
And he finally declares his love, and of course she is just alarmed and horrified. So comedy is all about exaggeration, and what the comics here are doing is they're exaggerating the way that guys are often hiding their dicks, yeah, and they're kind of hoping that just by kind of osmosis, like association, just being around a girl, eventually something will happen. Well, that may be the case if, you know, you're the last guy on the planet and the survival of the human race is at stake, and she's hit 30 and the clock's ticking. You know, he hasn't had sex for 15 years and you're on a desert island. Well, yeah, she might just take the clothes off. But 9 times out of 10, she's not. And she's certainly not unless you've communicated and triggered sexual attraction in her towards you. Okay, guys, it's a difficult topic, intent, and I think really the takeaway here is to communicate intent. And as I say, you can communicate intent in all sorts of ways on the date, and I've dealt that across the variety of vlogs, and we'll go on to deal with that in future vlogs too. So I just wanted to say that I've got 2 guys who are interested in a program next year. It'll be a tailored program, minimum 2, maximum 5, 3 or 4 is probably the ideal number, in which I, with coaches, will put you through a dating program, perhaps for the more vintage dudes, and kind of take you through the rite of passage that you need to go through. Not just a one-off flash in the pan kind of weekend away with a dating coach, but more of a kind of like a 3-month, perhaps the 6th month program. So stay tuned for details about that. I've got to get myself organised and work out how to make that program work. But I'm now very well situated in Warsaw, Poland, with a big apartment in a very central part of Warsaw. And I've now got all the kind of contacts around me to help to make this happen, so stay tuned. And finally, probably the best illustration, and I was a bit nervous about whether to share this with you, of how to get caught up in the friend zone eternally, is chapter 1 of my book, Too Late Mate, and I'm doing an audio version of the book. And last week I got the narrator, it's really good, we're really pleased with this narrator. I got him to do a couple of sample chapters, so I thought I'd bung up a sample chapter of Dreary Sunday, the opening chapter in my, whatever you want to call it, comedy, tragic adventure with a happy ending, kind of. So at the end of this vlog we'll run into that. I haven't directly answered the question that I posed at the beginning, but it won't take me long to answer it. Go out and get more dates, yeah? If you are dating other girls, surprise, surprise, it helps relieve the scarcity mentality that you have got. If you're going out and acquiring the skills and making approaches and going on dates, just that very fact itself will give you sort of a sense of abundance that may make it likely, well, to be honest with you, not very likely, but possible, that a girl that you're stuck in the friend zone with will actually flip round and become your girlfriend. Partly because you'll be relaxed, but also perhaps because you'll have, learnt a few more skills and be a lot more confident in this area of your life. So basically, in short, strap on your balls, you bastards. Get out there, get yourselves some dates. Till next time.
Chapter 1. Gloomy Sunday. My story begins one Sunday afternoon in January 2014. I was sitting in my gloomy office on Southwark Street, staring out of the window at a couple of pigeons pecking at the grey pavement, twiddling my mobile phone in my fingers. Should I call? I had been battling with the pain of my latest girl problem by burying myself in my work, without success. Gotia was a pretty petite Polish girl, and I'd been trying to date her for the best part of 18 months. I was on date 10, at least. In all that time, I had not even kissed her, let alone had sex with her. I had, of course, bought her gifts, taken her to the theatre, and bought her dinner. And strangely, in spite of all these excellent gestures of interest and commitment, she had not reciprocated with physical affection. And even more strangely, it felt that with each passing date, it was becoming less and less likely that she would. It had all seemed so perfect, and I could not understand why we weren't planning our honeymoon, or even choosing the curtains and picking out wallpaper for the kids' room by now. I had met Gotia in the Swan pub on Blackfriars Road, where she worked as a bar girl. My office at the time was next door. Over a period of visits, I'd managed to get her number, and made one or two, what seemed to be, bold moves in order to inspire her interest. On one occasion, I remember spontaneously jumping in my car and going round the pub, illegally pulling up on double yellow lines and walking in, planning to make some bold declaration of interest. She wasn't at the bar. I asked the manager where she was. The manager smiled and led me downstairs where Gotia was on her break, eating dinner. I actually sat down next to her, behind the bar, so to speak, and had a conversation. And then I left, without making any sort of move. On another occasion, I was in the Swan and came round to her side of the bar in order to show her some photos on my phone, and our fingers touched. Wow! It was electric. Eventually, I got her out on a date and tried to impress her by taking her to see an intellectual play at a theatre in Islington about Galileo. I had a nosebleed during the play, and she had to grab some tissues from her handbag. If my recollection serves me right, I think I may even have paid for a box. After the play, I took her to a Lebanese bar, and we sat together on a sofa chair. The mood was perfect. It was a Byzantine scene. There were candles and wall friezes and funky furniture, and we were sat side by side with the lighting low. And then I froze. In this context, freezing actually meant doing a lot of nervous talking and asking her a lot of questions. There she was, this lovely girl, sat next to me, presumably wanting me to do something, anything, but also possessed with the patience of a saint. I floundered. I felt that something ought to be done, that action should be taken, but I was in a deep fog about what that might look like. I had watched hundreds of romantic comedies, and so I assumed that perhaps just eventually the mood would be right. It would just happen. And that perhaps there would be a romantic moment at the end of the date at a bus stop, outside her flat, or under a lamppost. Eventually, the conversation dribbled out, and I said, "So shall we go?" 15 minutes later, I was continuing to flounder at the Islington tube entrance, even more puzzled, wondering how on earth I did this. Should I just kiss her? By now, it felt we had spent so much time together that this was just a massive step and would just be weird, coming out of nowhere. Perhaps I should invite myself back to her place. Or perhaps I should invite her back to my place. And then I thought to myself, good God, no. That's way too forward. In truth, I did not know what to do. The years of doing the wrong thing over and over had formed a bad habit that I simply did not know how to break. Shards of old advice from across the years lodged themselves in my mind. Tell her how you feel. Be yourself. Set a romantic mood. Get drunk. As I saw her disappear into Islington Station, I kidded myself that the lack of physical intimacy with Gotcha was a good thing, and that in fact we were building a firm friendship, the base of any successful long-term relationship. And yet there was this terrible, corrosive disappointment buried deep in my bones. I simply had no idea how to do it, whatever it was. I had no idea how to bridge the gap from friendly companionship to sexual intimacy. Although there might have been an element of self-sabotage, a big part of it was that I had no idea what I was doing. Men labour under the expectation that this stuff comes at birth, and they find the suggestion that it needs to be learnt and can be taught anathema. A leopard is born with spots, and a man is born with the instinctive understanding of how to mate with women, right? Gotcha felt like the sort of girl who would be perfect as a long-term girlfriend. She was both attractive, but also honest and direct, like a lot of Polish girls. She was good company. She was independent and self-reliant, but also sweet and interesting. She also had a little of the tomboy about her, and this was endearing and felt a little congruent with my nature. It really did feel as if we would be a perfect match. Furthermore, she had every reason to be attracted to me from the get-go. I had great social proof. I was a lawyer, earning a reasonable income, living in a nice apartment in London Bridge, and I had a wide social circle and plenty of outside interests and hobbies. I remember on one occasion I took her to a friend's film premiere at Waterside in Hammersmith. A ton of my friends were there, and she mingled and chatted with people. She must have thought I was a properly respectable dude and perfect boyfriend material. After all, she was just a poor, sweet Polish girl who would die for the chance to bag a well-spoken British lawyer. Right? We went on another date, this time a bus ride to a fancy, funky market, East Street Market in Bethnal Green, hipster land. We rode on the top deck on a Sunday morning and sat in an old, trendy, exposed brickwork antique shop and cafe, and we chit-chatted. Afterwards, I bought her a Chinese meal. We sat across the table from each other. It was close to the entrance of London Bridge Tube, and so naturally I led her once more to the station entrance, flapped around a bit, and said goodbye. And then we went for a walk together in Greenwich, where she was now living. And then we went salsa dancing together. And then the dates became more sporadic. And then she got a job with a small venture capital company in Shoreditch doing translation work. And then we met for lunch in the city, Moorgate, and she told me about her new boyfriend. And then she started a new, exciting job in human resources for HSBC. And then she came to my office to ask for advice on an employment contract. And then she started to confide to me about problems with her ex-boyfriend. And in all that time, I had not made a move. It was over 2 years. By now, I was sending her messages at Christmas and on her birthday on Facebook, still assuming that eventually it would all fall into place. It was on her birthday, in fact, that I finally decided it was time for a big romantic gesture, and I simply had to man up and lay my cards on the table. I arranged for a present to be sent round to her office at HSBC in Canary Wharf. I threw in flowers. I took care in giving a very precise message to the florist, along the lines of my undying affection for her and everlasting friendship and how I really liked her. Dear Gotcha, it has been great knowing you these 2 years, and I wish you all the happiness on your birthday. You will always have a good friend in me. I hesitated. And I really like you, I added. I thought twice about scribbling that out. But then I thought I'd have to go out and buy another card. Or could I draw a line through it, maybe? I hesitated once more. No, that would look needy, I concluded, decisively. Having checked that the florist had the correct address, I then rang HSBC and checked with them that Gotcha worked there. That proved tricky, and then I thought that perhaps I was overdoing it. So I rang back the florist to make sure they had her full name and that it was all spelt correctly, and then that was that. I waited. It was a Thursday afternoon. She did not respond. Strange. Perhaps the florist had not delivered it to the correct address? I had paid for same-day delivery, and I had used that florist before, so it could not be their fault. So I texted Gotcha to make sure that she had received it. She had. She replied with a brief, "Thank you." I heard nothing more. Where had been my response to the big romantic gesture? Now here I was, on that dreary Sunday afternoon in January, buried in my work at the office, trying to ignore it all. But I was twiddling my phone in my hands. I looked at it. I decided that I had to tell her how I feel. This would be the coup de grace. I dialed. It went through to voicemail. I left my message. Gotcha. Hi, it's Alex. Will you be my girlfriend? I hung up. I put the phone down and went back to work. And then, after a few moments, the phone vibrated. Yes! I jumped up in my excitement and quickly inspected the message. It read, Alex, I think we need to talk. My shoulders slumped, and I put my head in my hands. It was a long time before I eventually roused myself. I tried to get back to work but couldn't muster the energy even for that. I wandered aimlessly over to the window and stared out at the pigeons again.